Hello, my name is Hailey Duque, and I'm going to be giving a presentation about Abraham Lincoln. As many of you may know, Abraham Lincoln is one of, if not the greatest presidents our country has ever known. He is most famous for not only abolishing slavery permanently, but for also uniting America when the country was literally divided into two groups of opposing beliefs on the matter of slavery. He is known as an honest man, a hard worker, a very intellectual figure, a wise man for his age, and as a confident man. He is known for all of these great attributes and crowning achievements despite his harsh and uncertain upbringing. But what if I told you that you might have gotten the wrong idea about Abraham Lincoln? What if I told you that he was not as confident as many people suggest, and he had a lot of issues with his self image? What if I told you that Abraham Lincoln not only suffered from depression, but was even suicidal for some portions of his life, unfortunately? With this speech, I will give you a short and condensed history on Abraham Lincoln's life, focusing on traumatic focal points that he had to endure. This speech will also show how Lincoln was able to overcome every obstacle thrown at him and show that despite his struggle, he became one of the greatest presidents our country has ever known. In order to fully understand why Lincoln struggled so much in his later adult life, I believe that it is important to analyze his childhood struggles as a young adult Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a small log cabin in Kentucky. He was born into poverty. Actually, in fact, he was the only president in American history to be born from poverty. He grew up with a sister, a father who rarely ever supported him, and a mother who was only around until Lincoln was 9, unfortunately. This was due to her dying right in front of Lincoln's eyes from milk poisoning. Thomas Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's father, remarried a few years later, Abraham Lincoln did not fully recover from the death of his mother. On top of this, Abraham's father did not support Abraham's ambitions at all. As a young child, Lincoln loved to read, solve math problems, and overall learn. And while Abraham had ambitions to go to college and get a college degree, Thomas strongly urged him to stay with him and to do manual labor in his cabin. Abraham then moved out of his house at the young age of 18 to fulfill his goals to learn. Without any support from his family, he had to take up and odd jobs such as a ferry rider and a bartender. Although he was extremely poor at the time, many people who had interactions with him regarded him as with high esteem. Many people considered him to be a very wise man for his young age, as his previous stated. He was also many people's favorite bartender at the bar he worked for because of his ability to tell funny stories. But despite the many people who held him in such high regard, he still had many issues with his self-confidence. With Lincoln facial description to be long, thin, and almost ghost-like. On top of this, he was known for being quite awkward and shy with his first encounter with people, which in turn made it difficult for Lincoln to approach women. To add to his misfortune, Abraham's first ever love interest, Anne Rutledge, died from a typhoid fever. This left a young Abraham devastated, depressed, and even hesitant to fall in love again. His melancholy got so bad that Isaac Cogdale, an old friend of Lincoln, had to hide the knives in his apartment for fear that he would kill himself. Left alone and heartbroken, Lincoln was where he considered himself to be rock bottom. Despite his troubles, Lincoln still had ambition to learn, to rise above his father and become a lawyer. Soon after Rutledge's death, he decided to move to Springfield, Illinois. Although he eventually became a lawyer, he still had to manage his melancholy from time to time, with more instances of other friends of Lincoln's having to keep an eye on him in fear of him committing suicide. But then things started to look up for Lincoln when he met the love of his life, Mary Todd, the daughter of a wealthy man in the cotton industry in the South. The daughter of a man who owned slaves. Although Mary's father owned slaves, Mary was not a supporter of slavery. They ended up getting married and having 4 kids together. Things seemed to be looking up for Abe. He had a happy family, and he was running for senator of Illinois. Things seemed to be growing great for him. That is until Lincoln lost his election for senator, and he witnessed 2 of his 4 children die in front of his eyes. Heartbroken, Lincoln decided to run for president in 1860. He actually won this said election, and in 1860 he was sworn into office. This new election did not please the South, however, which they seceded from the United States and sparked the bloodiest war in American history, the American Civil War. It is said that Lincoln had the hardest presidency out of any other U.S. president, constantly stressed and under immense pressure. Lincoln became depressed yet again. And on top of all of this, as well, Lincoln's youngest son dies of typhoid. With Lincoln distraught, there was great fear that the war was lost. But then everything turned around. Lincoln ended up signing the Emancipation Proclamation, and the balance of power shifted. The Union ended up pulling through to win the war, not without the 600,000 lives lost in the fighting, of course. But nonetheless, Lincoln ended slavery, and kept the Union together during its most troubling hour. He ended up being killed by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865. Considered one of the most successful presidents in American history, Abraham Lincoln is truly someone that everyone should look at as a role model. He was able to accomplish so much in his short life despite his hurdles, despite the tragedy he had to endure, despite him clearly suffering from depression. I believe that Abraham Lincoln should be looked at as a clear example about how anyone can recover from anything. So to the people who are listening to this speech, don't let tragedy, misfortune, or any hiccup at all deter you from your goals. You can accomplish anything you set your mind to. Thank you very much for listening to me. Any thoughts would be very much appreciated. I stuttered a lot. Thank you.